So, hi everyone, this is Nina Collins from Revel. We're the events and community platform for women over 40. Recently merged with our company, The Wolfer, and we are loving all things Revel. And this is part of our regular conversation series. We're here today to talk to Susan McPherson, the author of The Art of Connecting. Susan is a corporate social responsibility expert who works at the intersection of brands and social good. And I need to understand a little more what that means. We'll learn from her. But she's also known as a serial connector. She's known as connection is Susan's superpower. And so she's written this book, The Lost Art of Connecting, and nothing could really seem more apropos to discuss on Revel, where we're all about connection. So welcome, Susan. Thank you for being here.
Well, I am thrilled to be here, Nina, and congratulations on the merger of your amazing company and Revel. Very, very exciting. And I just needed to make one little minor correction that the title is The Lost Art of Connecting.
The Lost Art of Connecting. Sorry about that. And I don't even have my copy with me. It's actually at at another place. So I'm sorry.
No worries.
I usually hold it up. The Lost Art of Connection. Connecting. Yes.
You can call it whatever.
Well, I also wanted to say, let me see, to make sure that I have the host and everyone. Okay. I wanted to tell the audience as you guys come into the room that you're very welcome to ask questions in the chat. And if you don't mind being recorded, you're very welcome to raise your hand and I'll call on you to speak. This is being recorded for our podcast, so you have that option. Otherwise, we're just going to kind of talk about a lot of stuff. So before we dive into you and your book, let's get the personal stuff a little bit out of the way. It's Susan and I are actually in a networking group together. So, and it's funny because you're a serial connector. I consider myself a bit of a serial connector. I looked at your Facebook this morning because I was curious how many people we have in common. We only have 141, which actually isn't that many. I would have thought we'd have more. It was kind of interesting. We're like, I thought we'd be in very much concentric circles.
Well, that's a good thing, right? That means we can bring more amazing people to each other.
That's right. It means we should set a goal, we should make it 200 by the end of the year or whatever and start introducing people. So can you start by telling us a teeny bit about what you do? Like, what does your work involve? Because you have a big consulting company. So tell us about it.
Well, I don't know if I would necessarily call it big, although we just hired our 14th employee. So I would say a mighty punch, but a small business, no doubt. I founded the company 8 years ago when I was 48. And it essentially provides the communications of impact. So we work with Fortune 500 companies, large and medium-sized nonprofits, sometimes foundations, all on how they communicate to the audiences they want to reach. So in some cases, it could be their own employees. In some cases, it could be the general public, but using all the means of communication that we would use if we were just doing regular communications, right? But we've grown successfully, I think, mainly because the team is incredible. I'm blessed, and I joke that I'm lucky they let me come to the office anymore, although we've been virtual since we actually started back in 2013. But
wow, you're virtual from the beginning. Okay.
Yeah.
Where are you, all over the country?
All over the country. Initially, we were back in 2013, mainly New York, and then over the last 2 years, pre-pandemic, it started. And I actually have an employee in Bulgaria and an employee in Ethiopia. They moved there. One, her husband's with the UN, hence Ethiopia. Anyhow, so we were virtual from the get-go, but I do believe we have grown very, very rapidly in the last few years because the world is finally prioritizing impact. I've worked in the field for about 20 years, and it was always, for companies at least, a very nice to have. And now, whether you're a startup, a mid-size SME, or a full-blown Fortune 100, it has to be like,
it's a must-have.
Yeah.
And when you say impact, I mean, it's social responsibility. Is it DEI work? Is it environmental? Where is
all the above? But again, we are the help with the communications of what the organization is doing. Yes, we do come in at the strategy level, but we're not going to rejigger a supply chain of a company, right?
So for example, I'm on the board of the Brooklyn Public Library, and if we hired you and we were in the middle of a campaign with our employees around DEI, or with our constituents around going free, fine free, which we've done recently, you would do projects like that. It's communications projects.
Yep.
Got it. very interesting.
Absolutely. And again, using all, the means that in the work that you do. And just to give you kind of an idea of some of our clients, the Women's Philanthropy Institute, an organization called Reimagine Gender, which is helping companies understand that gender can be something that, isn't binary, right? The Leadership Now project, which is a consortium of business leaders who are fighting to protect democracy. Zoetis, which is a Fortune 500 company that provides all our puppies and kittens with the meds that they need, as well as livestock around the world. Salesforce, Tiffany and Co. Foundation.
Wow, so all sorts of different interesting projects. It sounds like really fun work. It sounds really cool.
At the end of the day, I mean, it's a lot. And remember, organizations are never going to pay as much for the communications of impact as they will to try to sell, a vase, a vase, whatever. Yeah. But it especially in the world we're in right now, it does at the end of the day feel like at least you're trying to make a difference.
It's really meaningful. I went through I had kind of a detour in my career about 5 or 6 years ago, or I guess a little longer. I went and got a master's in something called narrative medicine. And then I worked for 3 years as a consultant at a hospital in Brooklyn. So I just really relate to what you're saying, because I was working in communications and healthcare, and it was kind of end of life care and doctors talk to patients, hugely important stuff. But after 3 years doing it, I kind of felt like there are a lot of problems in healthcare, and communication, while it's one of them, is not, going to be a priority for these institutions anytime soon.
No,
so it felt a little bit.
One of our clients is an organization called Endwell, which is founded by a doctor, Dr. Shoshana Ugenleder, who it's all about helping democratize dying to a
How great. Oh, I'm going to look them up. Endwell, super interesting.
Endwell. Yeah, and she would be a remarkable guest or speaker. It sadly, death is much more part of the public discourse now. For good and bad, but this notion of like dying with dignity, dying in, a wonderful hospice care is really limited to people of privilege. It is not something that, everybody can participate in,
no, 100%.
or even plan for. But so she is really trying to break that apart. But
very cool. We've just made a connection, because I will totally
love it. Oh, and you will fall in love with her. I also just have to say how thrilled I am that you are on the board of the Brooklyn Public Library. My mom did PR for the New York City Public Library in the 1950s.
Oh, wow. How fabulous.
Well, my dad was going to grad school at the Russian Institute at Columbia, and she basically worked to support him. So
how great. Now, I've always, like a lot of us, loved libraries, and I worked in a library as a kid. So I do love my work there. And I've been on the board since 2009, and I just became chair, and it's very exciting and fun.
I'm making a donation tonight.
Oh, that's very sweet. Look, we're connecting already. All right. So let's talk about this book. So of all the books you could have written, and I imagine there are a lot of them, why this book?
Well, over the years, people were like, you should write a book on social impact. I was like, there's so many of them. But there were a lot of books on networking. And I decided to take a kind of a different path, because I fervently believe networking and connecting are very different animals. But I grew up in the late 60s, early 70s, where every morning at the breakfast table, I would vie for real estate for my bowl of cereal, because my parents would have the 5 local newspapers, yesterday's New York Times, and the day before's Boston Globe. And they'd be clipping and cutting, and then going to their respective typewriters and sending off short little missives to colleagues, former students. My dad taught at a women's college for close to 40 years. And
really? Which one?
Russell Sage College.
Nice.
And he would have students, and he would have their daughters, and then he would have their granddaughters, and he would stay in touch with all of them until he passed in 2008. So seeing my parents do this, using, the technology of the times, I just assumed everybody's parents did that.
I have to say, my grandmother did this too. My father's mother was constantly sending me clippings, and I bombard my children with stuff all day long.
Well, there you go. Well, again, another connective.
But I loved it. Yeah. And she would send them to lots of people. Very similar things. She would write and send mail articles, and fascinating.
And, my mom did public relations, way back when at libraries, but then she was with PBS for many years. And they had taught me very early on this notion that every single person is worthy of our curiosity, our kindness, our compassion, and our interest. Meaning, don't make preconceived notions based on somebody's upbringing, somebody's job, somebody's location. And that somehow built in me or instilled in me this like notion of just being constantly curious, probably to the point of obnoxiousness. But by the time I got my first fax machine and I could do what they did, but simultaneously, it just became my calling card. Although I don't think those faxes ever got to where they needed to go.
I'm sure many did.
I don't know, but I could never figure out how to use the damn things. And then in the 90s, with the birth of the internet, it became, again, something both personally and professionally. I could put 15 people on the same email chain with an article saying, you all need to read this. And oh, by the way, you need, it was just became my thing. And then in 2007, I went away with 7 friends, probably a few, a woman named Lisa Witter, Ruthie Ackerman, Jamu Green. And our goal that weekend was to create, or at least be able to articulate, our elevator speech. And it was that weekend, that Sunday, I said, hi, I'm Susan McPherson, and I'm a serial connector. I almost peed in my pants because it sounded so ridiculous. But
Great.
16 years later, I wrote a book on it. So there's that self-fulfilling prophecy. And also, and I talk about this in the book, this notion of getting, when you're with trusted people or people you love, they can give you the feedback you need to be able to articulate your superpowers.
Yeah, absolutely. God, I met Lisa Witter around 16 years ago and have not seen her in ages, and she's great. Nice to hear her name again. She's an amazing
one of my best friends. Running an amazing company in Europe called Apolitical. So
I'm
there you go. You need to reach out.
Yeah, she's great. I relate to so much of what you say. I'm a big CC'er, and I love the reply all, which a lot of people don't like, but I always feel like it's more efficient, and I want everyone to know about all these interesting things, and you have to use it with discretion. But
absolutely.
So what is the difference between connecting and networking? And I'm sorry if I'm asking questions that are answered in your book, which I have read. It's just that I want our audience.
Please don't even.
No, but I want the audience.
No, and it's fun. So, I just, if you then read the book and I don't, if I don't say it correctly, just let it go. Networking is in the way I describe it, and if I often ask groups when I'm speaking to them to see a show of hands. How many of you are invited to connect with someone on LinkedIn, and then within an hour or two, the person is selling you something?
Yeah, that happens.
That's networking. Walking into a room, shaking hands, a virtual room or a real live room, and just passing out business cards, and then getting home, or a few hours later looking at the cards and being like, oh, who was that person, right? Connecting is having 1 or 2 meaningful conversations with people and then carrying on. Being, staying in touch over the long haul. I mean, my definition of a connection versus a networking contact is somebody who's with me for the long haul, that we can be helpful to each other, not a one-way transactional, hi, introduce me to.
Right.
And the arc, if I look back, I founded the company 8 years ago, and about 90 to 95% of our business has been inbound. And what that taught me was that in my 20s, in my 30s, a good part of my 40s, the people that I met, the people that I made introductions for, the meetings that I took, the times I allowed my brain to be picked, those came back to help.
Yeah. It's really comes down. I think a lot of it is a word you said earlier on. It's curiosity. Like, I am genuinely really curious about people. So I, like you, I can talk to almost to really anyone. Like, I just find people interesting, and I want to know what's going on and what their backstory is. But the idea that it coming back to you is interesting. It makes me think, do you ever feel overwhelmed? Like, I feel overwhelmed by how many connections I have sometimes, right? Like my email, the inbox, how many people I want to connect. Do you suffer from that?
I suffer from a lot of things. I don't know if that's one of them. But in the book, I lay out a methodology, and the first part of the methodology is something called gather, and can be done. Gather, ask, do is the full methodology. Yeah. It's something that can be done numerous times in your lifetime, and I say the world we're living in right now could be a very good time to try it. And during gather, you very intentionally think about who is it that you want to connect with, and but based on the following, what are your goals for the next 1, 3, or 5 years?
Yeah.
And also, remember, I mentioned the superpowers. What are the superpowers that you can bring to the fold to help those people you want to connect with, rather than what can you get from them?
What can they do for you? Instead of just
Yeah.
thinking, what can someone do for me? How do you mutually help each other? Right. And it comes down to that question you ask in the book. And I've seen you ask to people all sorts of, we're in this networking group, as I mentioned, I've seen you say, how can I help? Right. And that is this fundamental, every connection is an interaction. And, you know, what do you bring to it and what do they bring to it? And really genuinely feeling that, not just kind of, not just kind of intellectually saying it. I'm at my standing desk.
Oh,
So.
I love that. God,
Yeah.
you're great. You know, and I mentioned that LinkedIn transaction kind of happening. What if somebody instead said, you know, I know your platform just merged with Revel. How can I be helpful? Or what introductions can I make? Instead of saying, hi, do you need a bookkeeper? Or hi, can you buy from my accounting service? Do you see what I'm saying? Like, if you flip the switch and lead, as long as you're obviously authentic and intentional about it, and not just, genuine. Thank you.
Well, because I think it is about curiosity. It's about genuinely wanting to connect, which is, so I guess my next question for you is, how intuitive or how natural a desire do you think that is? Like, I always wonder with resilience, how, you know, are some people just born with it, or do they grow it? Like, you were obviously taught this skill as a child. Do you think it's innate for people? And what do you say to people who are less comfortable?
Yeah. Well, for one, if you're introverted or shy, connecting is far less of a hill to climb than networking, because it's one-on-one. It's asking meaningful questions of others to learn what's important to them, and then sitting back and listening. So you don't have to be the one that's effusive and you know, adding lots of details. Two, I think people have to understand what are the benefits that come. And that's why I share the story about my company growing, because of the connections I made. Because sometimes, you know, what's the point? And, you know, certainly college students, people earlier in their career might not actually be able to see that North Star far and away.
Yeah.
You know, I also like to share, you know, anything and everything good that's ever happened in my life has happened because of a connection. I mean, honestly. And so,
it's interesting to think about it.
Right. But if you unpack, you know, your career, I mean, yes, obviously the other things came into the mix, but the good things, the things that are really like memorable, happen because of someone else, or someone else knew. And
Well,
I
I
think
do have a nice boyfriend I met on Match.com. I don't think
there
that's
you go.
but well, I'm trying to think of exceptions to your rule, but I think that that's true. And actually, your point about young kids is really true. In raising, I have 4 kids in their 20s, and I feel like
wait, bury the lead.
Yes, we've never met, weirdly, so we don't know personal things about each other, really. Yes, I have 4 kids in their 20s, 21, 23, 23, and 27. And only one of them is, I would say, a natural connector and really gets the purpose, the power, the satisfaction. The other 3 are kind of anti-networking. They don't want help. And it's frustrating as their mom, because I know how useful it is, and also really how enriching it is. Like, for me, it's been the whole creation of the Wolfer community. You know, I really reluctantly turned it into a business. I couldn't stop because of the connections. The connections were what was so rich about it, you know? So do you think there are people for whom, I don't know, it's not necessary, not worthwhile? I guess I'm trying to understand the difference between connectors and non-connectors, and I'm kind of relating it back to our community, like in the Revel community, right? We're here to kind of make connections, find friends, share our expertise. I mean, it really is a community built around this idea of growth through connection. Yeah. So I wonder, for people to whom it doesn't come naturally, are those, I mean, it's interesting just from a business, like, as we try and attract new members, who are we trying to attract? Are we trying to convert people, or are we just trying to take people who get this intuitively? You know, how natural is it to human beings?
I think if people understand the good that would happen, it can become more natural. But I think, just like anything else, it's a muscle that, you know, you need to kind of finesse. And, you know, given the last 18 months of being, you know, isolated, I have found myself, you know, even me, extrovert, like times 10, when I've been at a few events, I feel socially awkward because, a year and a half of this, as opposed to in real life, you tend to start to feel a little rusty.
Yeah, and your skills aren't as good. It's true. And you went through a little bit of a health thing during COVID, didn't you?
So much. I had 2 weeks before my book launched, I herniated 2 discs in my back. But I couldn't get anything taken care of because I had something like 100 book talks. And then I had back surgery May 5th, May 3rd, May 5th. And then 2 weeks later, I was rushed to a different hospital because my sodium levels fell dangerously low. And I was 10 minutes from ICU. And then in the beginning of June, I started losing my hair in chunks. I lost a third of my hair.
Oh my God, Susan, your hair looks beautiful right now.
No, thank you. But if I showed you, no, it finally in October finally stopped shedding. And now
why was it happening? Do we know?
It's something called telogen effluvium, and it is hair loss from a triggering event. And the triggering event can be physical or mental. And I had both, right? I had the stress of the book launch. I had the severe back pain in March, but then in May, 2 hospitalizations. And then my dog had major surgery in May, and then she came home. She was upstate with my best friend who's a veterinarian. And then she came home in July, the end of July, and 4 days later, she broke 2 of my fingers. So I had to have hand surgery. So there you go.
You've had a rough year.
Yes.
Your hair looks beautiful. I'm really sorry to hear that.
Thank you. Well, if any of members of your community want to understand, because when you go through something like hair loss and now I know everything there is to know about.
Yeah. No, it's a huge subject for women our age. I mean,
oh my God.
Yeah, it's not uncommon at all.
No, but there's different kinds of hair loss. And I had to find the kind that, but that whole 3-month thing threw me off, because oftentimes people say, oh, you're stressed, so that's why. But by July, I was actually not stressed,
Mm-hmm. And then it started. Yeah. So I think what we were talking about is just being kind of rusty, socially rusty. It is true. I'm finding I'm trying to make a lot of in-person dates to meet people, and they often end up getting canceled or moved to Zoom because we're so used to the convenience of Zoom. And we are just a little, I met someone for breakfast in person this morning, and it was so nice to see someone in person. All right, we have a question from the audience. I was a consultant for many years in New York City and made some great contacts. Since I love helping people and I'm now retired, I used to happily share my contacts to people to bring people together. However, I've noticed that, but particularly among younger people, that I never find out what happens. No thank you note, no FYI updates, even if I know a good connection was made. Is this a new norm? It pisses me off. I hear you. It's nice to close the circle, as they say, and very important.
Well, and there's a chapter in my book where I talk about the importance of closing the circle. And I made the mistake recently of not doing that. And someone called me out, and I was horrified because I am so good about that, but it was a lesson learned. And I was glad she called me out. So I went to the snail mail and wrote a nice card and apologized. But with my tail between my legs, because of course, how disingenuous am I? But I think, and shamefully,
we're just really busy. I mean,
no, I know, but there's not, for me, that's like, because in this day and age, we have WhatsApp, text, DM on social platforms, email, there's so many ways, phone call. I mean, there's no excuse. But I get it. And I do, again, back to that. If people aren't in the practice, if they haven't been taught, I think it's a gentle way to say, make this a habit. It's good professionally too. I mean, it's going to help you.
No, because every time you close the loop, you're reinforcing that relationship.
Exactly,
I mean, it is a funny thing, because honestly, I really think, like for you, this is kind of second nature to me. I don't know why. It's just part of how I live. But then, like I see with my children, it's not. And so for some people, it does have to be taught, learned, reinforced. I don't write thank you notes, I have to say. That would be my confession. I get back to people. I think I'm quite good at closing the loop, and there are a million ways we do it, right? Instagram, Facebook Messenger, text, email. But I do lately, I'm feeling a little bad that I don't write. I mean, the only time I really write thank you notes is when someone has died. Then not thank you notes, but send a handwritten note. Are you big on thank you notes? Is that a big part of your?
I would necessarily big, but when somebody sends me something or does something out, out of the ballpark, right? I will. But again, that's the second step. You have to ask people for their address, right? We don't typically have,
Right.
but I do try to do I always do that? No. I mean, my late father was so obnoxious. I think he almost turned me off from writing thank you notes, because what he would do is if he sent like a gift or something, or a donation in like to one of my cousins, let's say for, graduation or something, and then they didn't respond, he would send them a self-addressed envelope with a note inside waiting. And it was like those things, when you're
No, but I get it.
so embarrassed.
I remember forcing my kids to write thank you notes when they were little. And so maybe that'll be one of my resolutions, to add another to-do to my, because that is the problem, is the connecting can be like in the Wolfer community. I mean, I'm talking to hundreds of women all the time. And so remembering to bring people together and get back to everyone can just be very time consuming, but also rewarding.
It's totally rewarding. And, it doesn't have to be the next day. It doesn't have to be the next week. But I think what I am a slave to is I write notes in my calendar to spark, if it's a week from now, I will say, remember to thank Nina for this wonderful opportunity this afternoon.
That's a good thing to do. So walk us through, before we wrap up, the gather, ask, do. So we talked about gather. I really liked that idea. Actually, I'm going to use that tip of, so think about in the next 5 years, what your goals are.
Or 1 year, 5 years sometimes can be,
Yeah, 1 year, what you want to achieve, which I'm actually really in the process of doing, because I've just started these 2 new big jobs. Like I've started this job at Revel, and I've started the board chairmanship at the library. I feel like I'm in kind of a new professional phase, and I am kind of thinking like, okay, what are my real goals now? So this is a good moment for me to try this out. So think about what you want to achieve.
Yep. You think about what your superpowers are, because again, you want to be thinking about how you can be helpful to others.
Yeah.
And think about how you can break that hermetically sealed bubble where we tend to attract people nearest to us who look like us, sound like us, the same age, race, color as us, right? So that it's a very self-audit, intentional look at what you can be doing to break that spell. The gather phase is the next phase, and that's where you learn to ask the meaningful questions of others to be able to find out what their hopes and dreams are, what their goals are, what their superpowers are, okay? And if you listen carefully, and in research for the book, I learned how woefully bad at listening we were, myself included. But once you do that, you can then go to the phase that clearly, Nina, you love to live in, and I love to live in, and that's the do phase. And that's when you make those introductions, you follow up, you send a thank you note, you, make be a reference for something, all the things we can do to be supportive of others.
Yeah.
And this isn't a one and done. This can be done throughout, your life. I think, at any time you're going through an inflection period or a change or a global pandemic, this kind of process can be very, very helpful.
Do you ask people? I'm now thinking I should ask, what's your superpower in our How She Revels profile. So do you ask people what their superpower is?
Or I'm able to surmise by asking questions. And then there's no greater gift than when you introduce them to someone else, where you can state what their superpower is.
Hey, this person is exceptional at X.
Yeah. And by doing that, you make people feel seen and heard, which is basically one of the things we're all craving, right?
What we all want. Yeah, absolutely. So think about what you can offer and identify people who you want to meet or get to know. I mean, I really like the intentionality of it, because I do think that I believe in that whole manifestation thing in large part. I feel like I've done it over and over in my life. It's, you state what you really want and you figure out how to get there.
Yeah.
And then you think about what you want to ask for, right? And not feel, because
I was going to say, I'm a big believer, you putting it out there, like you're saying, but also, for instance, breaking that hermetically sealed bubble, start by asking the people closest to you. If they know someone who is a different age than you, that is from a different cultural heritage as you, don't be afraid to ask for an introduction. I think sometimes we think people are very, either don't want to be helpful, which yes, there's always going to be some that you don't want or can't, and that's fine. But the vast majority of people want to be helpful, and they don't own those people. I mean, I always do the opt-in. I always ask before I make an introduction. But generally speaking, most people, unless they are going through, 2 hospitalizations like I did in May, will say yes. And it's a very, like you said, a very intentional way to be mindful of, these worlds we've created for ourselves and start to kind of disrupt them a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. So think about disrupting your world a little bit is a really good way of putting it, of kind of making things a little bit up in the air, of kind of moving things around a little bit more. One of our attendees says, off topic, Susan, you look fabulous, in all caps. My
Oh,
friend has severe hair loss. Did you find any meds or treatments that work?
well, what I learned was the actual hair is going to come out whatever you do, meaning when you have the trigger that a trigger, what happens is the file, like everything stops because your body takes all that energy that goes into growing hair and puts it elsewhere. So you just have to, you have to like accept that. And then do everything you can so that the new hair coming in is healthy. So vitamins, you can use, a laser helmet, which, one doctor prescribed. I mean, because what you want to do is encourage the new growth. But thank you. And I tend to, I'm not a huge Facebook user, but there's groups for people going through this. And I found that so helpful to know that I wasn't alone when I was going through it.
Yeah. Well, I think it's like anything, right? Any trauma, when you're getting divorced, when you're going through infertility, when you have cancer. I mean, it's one of the reasons communities like ours are so good for people, because when you realize you're not alone, you're not the only person, it's hugely helpful. So I'm sure that really helped. I had dinner a couple of weeks ago with a friend who also has fairly severe hair loss, and she's just managed by wearing it back, and she looks beautiful, but it's traumatic. And one of my daughters has hair issues. So I've been doing some research also. It's common.
And when I would go in to take a shower, and chunks with that, I felt like, I needed a Xanax to actually go take a shower, right? It was so, and then to look at the drain, and again, this was after all this other stuff. So it's weird that was so much worse in some ways than all the hospital stuff. But I think your community would understand.
Yeah, I'm really sorry you've been through all that. So tell me, before we wrap up, what are you looking forward to most in the next year? And what's your biggest challenge in the next year?
Making sure we can hire the right people because the business has grown and hiring is very, very challenging. Two, I want to fall in love. I've been single for 7 years, so I want to make that a priority this year. I don't know if I necessarily falling in love, but I'd love to meet somebody that I could fall in love with.
That's a really good priority. It's also, I think, hugely important to say that aloud. I think people who want to meet someone, we have to be upfront about it. And are you networking in that way? Are you asking people to introduce you?
I have never, in my 57 years of life, I have never been introduced by a friend to somebody else. And maybe that's telling. I don't know.
No, I think we have to just change that. Yeah.
I know. So putting it out there. I do see a question from somebody though in the audience. I'm happy to.
As an introvert, I find it difficult to talk to people. Do you have any suggestions to help overcome that first step to start talking to someone?
Absolutely. Definitely, if you do read my book, go to the ask section because there's actually a chapter that gives you questions to have in your back pocket. And I'm a big believer in, yes, it's scary if you're an introvert. I will be one in my next life. I'm committed to making that happen. But the thing is if you're the one asking some questions, then you can sit back and listen, where people who may be introverted are more comfortable. Also, I often find if you're not a little bit vulnerable, others won't be reciprocal, meaning you'll end up talking about the weather or you'll end up talking about what you had for lunch, which won't deepen anything. They're safe conversations. So, I have found that right now, given that we all have experienced this pandemic, obviously to differing degrees of horror shows, but the point is that we have commonality in our uncommonality. Mm-hmm. So how do we tap into that and use it for the way it's abused us? And really just say, how are you doing? What do you need going forward over the next several months as we build back,
Yeah. Well, I think your point about vulnerability is huge. I mean, actually, I was watching something really funny. Oh, I was watching this TV show on HBO about millennials. It's called, I think, Love Again. And there was a mother character, like a middle-aged mother character who they kind of mocked because at one point she said, "Have you read Brene Brown?" But honestly, Brene Brown's work on vulnerability and shame really did change my life, totally. And her whole point, I think applies to this, that whenever you're vulnerable, the other person is comfortable being vulnerable, and it opens up so many possibilities as opposed to just talking about things like just be real.
Yeah, and she has this great methodology where, for instance, in a team meeting, instead of asking your teammates or your colleagues how they are, say in 3 words, describe how you're feeling today. And it's much easier to not say, I'm fine, I'm okay. Right. Because you're thinking about that. The other thing I talk about in the book is the power of 3s when you are going to an event, whether it's an online event or a real life event. Go with the mindset that you're going to meet 3 people, share 3 things about yourself, and learn 3 things about others.
I love that.
And then you can go hide in the bathroom.
Wait, repeat that because I'm going to write it down for myself. So meet 3 people, share 3 things.
And learn 3 things.
And learn 3 things. That is so great. Because and then I know we're short on time and you have to go, but my first post-COVID cocktail party, I went to like a political fundraiser here in Brooklyn a couple months ago. And, I used to go to those things a lot and I assumed I would know a lot of people and I am comfortable going to parties. And I walked in and didn't know a soul in the room. And I was like, But I ended up just talking to people. I didn't completely follow these rules, but I ended up having a great time. And which isn't surprising because I'm a connector like you, but I think having these rules is really a great guideline. I'm going to use that always. Meet 3 people, share 3 things, learn 3 things.
And Nina, if you think about it, oftentimes we know who's going to be in the room before we go. So back to that gather phase, you can actually be really intentional about who is it that is going to help you meet your goals or people that you feel you can be helpful to.
Yeah. No, this is really good advice. And also in 3 words, describe how you're feeling is great. Brene Brown is just the best.
Oh my God. Remarkable.
Yeah. And I want to thank Eileen in Boulder, who really enjoyed this conversation and said she wants her daughter to watch it. And she's also ordered the book. Fabulous. Yeah. So Susan is really a superhero. I'm very glad we got to have this conversation. Her book is called The Lost Art of Connecting. It came out this year. It's just behind Susan there in the picture. Maybe you want to hold it up. And this recording will be available on both our podcast, which is called Raging Gracefully. You can find it anywhere you find podcasts. Also on YouTube, on the Revel channel. It'll also be a piece of content in our Sunday newsletter this week, which goes out to 30,000 women. So it should be very readily available. And I'm really so glad we finally met. Now we'll start seeing each other at things. Like I think I'll see you Thursday at Sybil's Caddis event. Exactly.
Yes. Amazing. I can't wait to see you on.
And we also didn't talk about the fact that we have Stephanie, of course, in common, my beloved Stephanie Stahl. And so that's how I think we first met.
Yes. So. And she knows Lisa Witter too. That's how I met Stephanie years ago.
Oh, that's right. And I introduced them. So we really are a little bit of a exactly.
But this is a lesson, I think, to all of us that, things sometimes take time, but everything happens because of connections.
Yeah. And, recently, I don't know if you got Stephanie's email yesterday about the Lost Women of Science podcast, that she's just launched this really cool, and it's because I introduced her to a woman named Katie Hafner, who is a journalist. So anyway, it just keeps coming around. Now Stephanie's working on this really interesting podcast that aligns with her interests around her mom. And it's because it was obvious to me when I spoke to Katie, like, who's the daughter of a scientist, Stephanie. So yes, we all have to encourage each other to keep paying it forward and connecting.
Oh, well, I love this time together and I can't wait to see you in real life. And thank you. Thank you for being here, Susan. All right, we'll talk soon. Take care.